Hi, and welcome to Conversations with Hannah. Today I am joined by one of my dear friends, Melissa Pride-Fahs, who is a local business owner and somebody involved in much of what's going on in the community. And I wanted to have you here today to talk about not only what's going on in Beacon Hill, but some of the stuff that's going on around the community. But I thought it would be good if you wanted to just give a brief overview of who you are. I know people are probably familiar with you because you did Ask the Manager a couple months ago with our new town manager. Yep. But tell us a little bit about your business and some of the stuff that you do in Shrewsbury.
Sure. I own a marketing and public relations firm called Emerge Marketing and work on the Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services Board of Directors with you. And also am a advisory board member for Shrewsbury Media.
That's great. And you do more than just work on the board for Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services. You're the vice chair, and this year you're heading up the gala again, which you did a couple years ago. I know when we had a record-breaking year. Yeah. And you're making some changes to it this year.
Yes.
We're going to the Haven.
Going to the Haven for more of an evening of giving and sort of transferring the gala to an event that's a little smaller, but also having a community event where everybody can still participate in fundraising and also the support for Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services during the Spirit of Shrewsbury Week in September.
Yeah, I think the changes are good, and I think the more events that we can have for the community as well to sort of understand what we do at SYFS,
yes.
The better. One of the things that we've also been working on with SYFS is hopefully moving to a larger space on the UMass campus that's there. So we're getting close to being able to move from the building that we're in up to the Higgins building, which I think is double the size of what we're in right now, which will be a huge help because we do have a waiting list.
We have about a 4-month wait list, and it will help alleviate that need in the community, and also be able to grow our programming. To have more offerings from senior programs to more counseling rooms and a group therapy room, which is really helpful that we currently don't have.
Yeah, it's amazing when we moved to that building and now looking at the size of the community and the people that we're serving. And there's certainly more of an incidence, I think, these days, especially in the schools, of youth suffering from whether it's anxiety or, as you mentioned, the grief. We've had lots of kids who have lost parents and making sure that we're able to do some therapy work and opportunities for them to come together with other kids who are in a similar situation. So that's been something that I know has been a priority for SYFS and you on the executive committee.
Yeah, it's a great board. It's a really great committee, and we're really lucky to have Christine as our interim director. She's spearheaded a lot of new initiatives and really trying to secure the future of the agency, which I think it's better than ever, and it's growing, fortunately and unfortunately, but we're ready to adapt to the community's needs.
That's great. Well, thank you for all you do on that, and it's fun to be able to work on that together.
It is. Yep. We don't work on enough together. So I wanted to talk, March is Women's History Month, so you being a female legislator, I know you were inspired when you were young for public service, so I wanted you to talk a little bit about that, and also maybe encouraging young women to run for office is a priority of yours as well.
It is. I grew up in Maine, and so when I was born, Margaret Chase Smith was one of the senators, and she had been the first woman from Maine who had been elected to both, her husband got ill. He was in Congress. He got ill, and she ran and won the seat and served in the House of Representatives, and then she went on to run for Senate. And then she became the first woman in our country to serve in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So she was a real trailblazer in that endeavor. And she was a moderate Republican, but she oftentimes broke rank with her party when it was something that she felt was important, and she really had no problem speaking her mind either. When Joe McCarthy was sort of running rampant with his accusations, she was the first person to stand up from the well of the Senate and to say enough. And so I always sort of admired her, and actually Maine has had some other women, Senator Olympia Snowe, Senator Susan Collins, who's there, who have really sort of been in that tradition of standing up for what they believe is right and not letting party stand in the way of that, and that's something I've always admired. So, one of the things, and you and I have had this conversation quite a bit, that concerns me is that despite the fact that women are over 50% of the population in our country and over 50% in Massachusetts. In the State House now in Massachusetts, we have less than a quarter of the elected officials serving are women. And it's an interesting issue because it's a problem that women don't run.
Yeah.
They don't think they have the ability or the skills or the time sometimes, and so they take themselves out of consideration. But when they do run, they win at the same percentage that men win at. So there's a statistic that women have to be asked 7 times to run for office before they even start to think about they could possibly be a good candidate.
Right.
And I always joke that men never have to get asked because they just identify that I would be a great candidate and I will run and win. And so I do a couple of things. One, I spend time with my women legislative colleagues, reaching out and talking to other women who are thinking about running and sort of talking about how we went about it, helping them think through, you do have to be able to raise money.
Yeah.
It does take time away from your family, especially when you're running for office. And so figuring out how as another woman we were able to balance those things is helpful. But then I also try and spend as much time as I can with the younger generation, talking about public service being something that is noble and good. And it's not just the blood sport that you see on TV, which these days is largely entertainment driven. But it is also the opportunity to work collaboratively and productively with colleagues in a bipartisan manner and to be able to serve your community. And so every time I'm out with the next generation, I get really excited because they are so positive about wanting to be impactful. They see the opportunity, and sort of helping them direct their energy is important to me. And this last month, there was a group at AMSA, the Advanced Math and Science Academy, of women who head up the AMSA UNICEF group, and they wanted to do a fundraiser for UNICEF and tie it into being Women's Month. And so they held it a couple weeks ago, and they had 5 of us speak, and they asked us to speak because we were in careers that are typically still more populated by men than women.
Right.
And so there was a woman who's very high up in Intel who was talking about technology, and she actually went to school in India, and her grade school that she was sent to was all women. And then she went to apply to one of the technical universities where she was the only woman with all men. And just talking about even having come from India and then coming here to do her master's and PhD and then getting into a technology company here, just still, the fact that there were many fewer women than there were. So it was a really interesting evening, but these 4 young women who were in high school at AMSA organized this whole event.
That's amazing.
And it was a lot of other young women who were at the event, and they had great questions. We all got to speak, and then we did a panel, and
were they all high school age?
They were all high school.
High school age, yeah.
Mostly juniors and sophomores who organized it. And so, being in those opportunities with people who are still high school is great. And then there was a group at Harvard University of women who asked me to come speak a couple weeks ago. They're a group of conservative women who found that on not just their college campus, but others, it was difficult to find opportunities to talk about policy and discussion with women that tended to be more conservative. And so they started what was originally a book club, and then really turned into more an opportunity to have speakers come in. They had the woman who was the campaign manager for Carly Fiorini come and talk a couple months ago. And they've had other women in Massachusetts who are involved in different things. So they asked me to come in and speak about my role being on public health. And I talked to them about the opioid epidemic and what we were doing here in Massachusetts. And it was great to see, again, people really interested in the meat of policy and, did you think about this? Did you think about that? And the great questions that they asked. So, I try and take advantage of any opportunity that anyone gives me to go talk to young people. And I also like to talk to the young men, too, to encourage them to support women if they run. That, this is something where, if a woman does decide to run, she needs to be able to seek support from both men and women. And I always tell the rooms that, I think that the best candidate should always win.
Yeah, sure.
Regardless of gender. The gender shouldn't be a decision-making factor.
Yes.
But we should have more people involved in the political process and be putting more people forward. And that's, a positive step for women, because we know that, especially for young women, they go to where they see role models, where they see other people doing things. And so if we want the next generation to be thinking about public service, our young women, then we need to be showing them, here's what I'm up to, here's why I think it's great, and and it would be an opportunity that would be something that you could consider as part of your career plan or life plan.
Right. Why do you think that predominantly men, what would be the pivotal factor for young women, whether it's, I think high school might be nice to cultivate, but a little too early to decide.
Right.
But post-college, or even later on in their 20s and early 30s, to get them to serve on more boards and committees in order to maybe prepare them instead of taking that leap from nothing to everything.
And that's what I really say. I talk about how I ended up running for state representative, which I always knew at some point I wanted to serve in public service, but I never had a plan to get there. I just kept getting involved in things that were going on in the community that I thought I could help out with, that were interesting to me. And from that, you sort of build your network that exists. And that's what I encourage a lot of them to do. Get involved in things that you're passionate about. And from that, you know, if you later want to run or serve. And I also encourage people to serve at the local level first. I first ran as a town meeting member and did that for a long time. There's multiple ways to get involved, but you're not only building up your network when you do that, you're building up your basis of knowledge.
Right.
Which is really important, especially if you're going to be an advocate for community. Having a strong pulse on the community and what's important and who's who is critical. So you can't just decide one day, I think I'm going to run for office and suddenly get active.
Right.
It really needs to be more of a longer-term commitment to wanting to be active in your community and being a part of it.
Right.
And then ultimately taking steps along the way to set yourself up for running for office.
And I think time is always a big factor for women.
It is.
And the lack of.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that you do really well is trying to teach your daughters that public service is, it's as important for mom to be out on Beacon Hill changing our communities as sometimes it is to be home checking homework, and it's a balance, but at the same time, it's serving as a role model as well as a legislator, and I think that's maybe something that could be influential to women too, to realize.
It is. I tell everybody, my children certainly, but other people I come in contact with, my priority is always my kids, my family.
Of course, always.
And there are some elements of this role that it's actually really helpful in that, setting schedules and time. And there's other times where, you are out more. But I think for my kids, what I hope that they learn is what I learned from my parents and grandparents, that getting involved in serving in whatever capacity that you enjoy is really the best. None of my parents and grandparents didn't serve in elected office, but they helped run Little League, and they were very involved in the church and very involved in the schools. So I learned that essence of wanting to be a contributing member of the community from them.
Right.
And my own sort of desire to serve in public office was fueled by women that I saw serving when I was young and thinking, this is something that I could go do.
Right. And you've got some great women colleagues.
I do. I'm very fortunate. We may be a smaller number, but we're certainly
force to be reckoned with.
a good group of women can get a lot done.
Transitioning to that, your website grows every day with committees, and that you're serving on, but also that you're involved with on Beacon Hill and in the local community as well. I believe you just took on another committee role and a few more assignments. Can you talk about those?
Sure. So in the beginning of the session, I was put on 3 committees, the ranking minority member on public health and on marijuana policy, and then continuing my service on transportation committee. But we had an opening on the mental health, substance use, and recovery committee earlier this year, and I had asked leadership if they would assign me to it. One, because I've been doing a lot of work both at the local level in terms of the opioid epidemic and thinking through, how will legalization of marijuana impact our youth, and then also on the national level with the Women in Government Foundation, doing a lot of that work with women legislators from around the country. So a lot of my work on marijuana policy had sort of finished up because we needed to get our legislation done in order for the Cannabis Control Commission to get their work done in preparation of launching the retail side of things. So I felt that I had the time to devote to it, and it matched up well with other things that I was doing. And the governor has filed a second large bill designed to help on the opioid epidemic, and that is something that's in our committee right now and that we're working on. So we're hopeful to get that out and to be able to pass something before our session ends in July. So there's work to be done on it right now. So it sort of had a gap and an interest, and I matched those two things together. And then in addition to working on those committees sort of on Beacon Hill, I'm a member of the Mass Food Policy Council, and we meet about every other month for half a day working on issues, and then we have 6 priorities that we're sort of consistently working on. One of the issues, the Mass Food Policy Council is really designed to help think through how do we continue to support our local farmers, and what are some of the issues that they have, and then how do we encourage people to buy more local, not just in their own communities, but we work on things like how do we get colleges and universities and school systems to buy more locally sourced food. And so one of the other issues that I've worked on is what's called the Healthy Incentive Program, which was launched last year as a means to provide people who receive SNAP benefits with fresh food, fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, that's right.
And it also supports the farming community because they basically can use their SNAP benefits at a farm stand or at a local farming if they sell on site. And every dollar that they spend on a fresh fruit or vegetable is added right back to their level. So they're not losing, and there's, depending on the size of the family, it's up to $20, $40, $60 a month. And the benefit is they're getting local fresh food, and then our farming community is getting increased sales. And this was done as sort of a pilot, and we anticipated having about $3.5 million that could be spent over 3 years. In the first 9 months of the program, we've used all the funding because there's been such high demand. And people have been going to winter food markets and buying food. And you know, for people who are in urban settings, you would think that they would have proximity to buying food. And yet there's a lot of sort of urban deserts where they have no ability to go buy fresh food. And so we've also encouraged a lot more of the mobile marts to be coming in. And again, so they're bringing fresh food in different locations. In Worcester, there's several locations. Some of them come right into senior centers. Other times it's going to a highly trafficked area, but one where there isn't any opportunity to go to a local store and buy fresh food. So right now I'm working with Representative Dan Donahue from Worcester, and he and I are trying to get some supplemental funding through the House of Representatives and the Senate so that we can continue it through the balance of this year, and then we're working on what do we do in the future. This was sort of a pilot program. We have more need than we thought we could, that we would have in such a short period of time, and so we want to be able to continue to supply people with the opportunity to buy the fresh food and vegetables, and supply the farmers with this new source of customers, but we have to balance it with available revenue sources. So, and it's funny because the Westboro Food Pantry, when we do the golf tournament, we raise money for them. They have been doing this sort of all along. They use the money we donate to them to do coupons to the farmers market in the summer, and so people use the coupons to buy the fresh food. So it's essentially taking something that they've done well on a local level and trying to make it a statewide opportunity for people.
Which is so great that there's reception to eating fresh local foods and supporting our farmers for all the hard work they do, but also it's just a better, it's a better resource.
It's much healthier.
So that's great.
And then the one other one I actually get to work with Kevin Mitzikar on. He is on the Special Commission on Local and Regional Public Health, and we're sort of unique in our state in that we have a local public health board in every community, all 351, and sometimes it's not the most efficient way to deliver services, and there's an inequity because some communities can put more budget dollars towards some of the local health issues and priorities than others. So he and I are on a commission with others looking across the state of how can we make sure that we're delivering the same level of services to all residents in the Commonwealth and balancing sort of the fiscal reality that exists in different communities. And it's Shrewsbury is a little bit unique among communities because we are a member of the Worcester Regional Health Consortium, which has worked out really well for our community. And so we're sort of looking at, could this be a model for how to scale this up across the state? So
it's such a great program. It's so great.
Yeah.
Moving into maybe a little bit of talk about what's happening on Beacon Hill. I know that you're operating on a 2-year legislative cycle that aligns with the 2-year terms for the legislators. Where is that in the process, and can you talk about that?
Sure. So we're in our 2nd year right now, and we're in formal session through the end of July. So any bill that requires a roll call vote or is in the least bit controversial needs to be done by the end of July. Because after that, we're in informal session through the end of December, and things like home rule petitions or a liquor license, things that are very simple and not controversial, can continue to move through in informal session. But things that people would deem to be something that they would want to have a voice in, we typically have to get done by July 31st. And so the way in which we operate is that in our 2nd year of our cycle, all of our bills have to come out of committee. This year the deadline was in early February, so that there's time to consider taking them up. Many bills actually don't come out of committee. There's about 6,000 bills that get filed every session.
Wow.
Only about 4 to 5% of those bills make it all the way through to law. So a decent amount of bills that are in committees get sent to what's called study, which is basically they either didn't have time to work on them to get them ready to be released, or they just didn't believe that the bill was either appropriate or, quite frankly, it didn't have the support within the committee to further it on. But a lot of bills do get reported out, and now everybody, sort of all legislators, are in a mad dash to have their bills that got reported out get into the queue for being taken up between now and July 31st. Myself included.
It's the mad dash.
I have a bunch of bills in there that I've been working on, for the last 2 years, and I'm hopeful that they'll get through. Sometimes bills make incremental progress, so maybe they didn't come out of committee the session before, but this session they actually got a vote and they're out of committee, and they might not make it the whole way. So a lot of these bills that we're dealing with this session, folks who come back and get reelected or elected next session, will file them again basically a year from now, hoping that they go further. But there's, for the most part, the committee work itself is done. We've considered our bills. There are also some bills that get an extension, which you can apply and say, we're still working on this set of these bills here, and we'd like more time. And so for the most part, that's really through April is the longest extensions that we have, some into early May. But the longer you go with the bill in the committee, the less likely it is it's going to have time to essentially work its way through the legislative process. But there are quite a few that I'm hoping to get through, and we have had some local bills go through lately. We had in Westboro the Borough program, which is their new program they're keeping in district for 18 to 22-year-olds, and it's both sort of a vocational learning opportunity, and then they're going to have, they're calling it the Sugar Shack, a candy store at the Rotary, where the students in this program get to work.
I read about
so
that. Yeah.
we had to get through the legislature the ability for them to have a revolving loan fund for the income and expenses to come out of for that. So that just got through. Senator Moore and I are working right now on the bill that we have filed to have the state give us the Glavin property, so that we could potentially use it to site the new school that we're thinking about building, and would have to ask the voters certainly for their support of. And then also the Lake Quinsigamond Commission. We worked on a bill last year, and Senator Moore and I got it through both of our branches, and then the governor signed it about a month ago. So we were happy to have that go through. So there's always a lot going on legislatively. It's just trying to balance, where do you put your energy and time? Where do you have the best chance of getting a bill all the way through, versus where do you sort of accept incremental progress and think you'll come back next year and get even more support for it. So I know Senator Moore and I are both in that same spot right now of trying to be members of the mad dash of the legislature, trying to get our bills through.
And it's a little bit amazing that you can keep all of them straight with how much you know, every other day you're filing a new piece of legislation that I think is pretty remarkable, that you're so active for Shrewsbury and Westboro, and listening to constituents and concerns that are going on is probably a big part of it, but also just having a good pulse on what's going on and what's needed in the community.
Well, and part of that goes on to, we're in the midst of working on the budget right now. The governor filed the budget in January, and A lot of what both Senator Moore and I have been working on is sort of the feedback from the community. Even though the education funding is the highest level it's ever been, you know, there are those of us, and I share this, that there's not enough coming back into our own communities. And so, you know, I've been working with the Shrewsbury School Committee. They have been very good about both Dr. Sawyer and the school committee sending in letters, sort of voicing from their perspective, and that's very helpful to Senator Moore and I, because it's that much more powerful when you can go and say, it's not just it's not just me.
Right.
My school committee, my superintendent, the teachers, the people, the parents, they all feel this way. And so when the House takes up our budget in April, you know, I will be working hard to try and secure more education funding, not just for Shrewsbury and Westboro, but for, you know, communities across the state as a whole. It's a real priority. We are tops in education in the country, and yet there are some real disparity between students who are performing high or well and those who aren't. And so we can't pretend that we don't have real issues that we need to deal with. And then certainly when we aren't funding at the state level, there's more pressure on the local property tax payer to fund that differential. So, you know, I sit on both the Shrewsbury Finance Committee and at the state level, and which I really love, because I love being able to hear on both ends, and then being able to go back and advocate on Beacon Hill for how it impacts our communities when we're not, you know, funding at the highest levels possible. And certainly some of the special education funding, you know, right now there's a bit of a gap. We intended to fully fund it at 75% last year. It turns out what came in looking for reimbursement was higher, and so now we're only funding at 65%. In Shrewsbury alone, that's about a $456,000 hit to the school budget that they now have to figure out how to absorb in these last few months of the fiscal year. And so working on circuit breaker funding with many of my colleagues from across the state is also a priority, in making sure that we get enough funding in it next year, and also trying to get some $36 million put into it for the balance of this year, so that we can make communities like Shrewsbury, who, you know, budgeted on those numbers, whole, and not leave them with a gap that we have to fill. So the budget is something that is almost worked on all year round. It feels like we never stop working on a budget, but tomorrow morning I have my meeting actually with the House and Ways and Means chairman. We all get to have 15 minutes with him to sort of put in our plug for what's important to us, and certainly education funding and local aid. But the other three priorities that I have in there include looking for money for Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, because we just came, as you know, to the end of a 3-year grant on youth mental health first aid, and it didn't just benefit Shrewsbury. We've been training people all across the Commonwealth, and now that the federal grant has ended, Senator Moore and I are asking if the state would help, because again, this is something that benefits many communities. And so I will be making a pitch for that tomorrow, in addition to some of the other local priorities that I have for funding. Yeah,
it was a big grant that the federally wasn't renewed for mental health monies. So that's a substantial grant that didn't, like you said, didn't only benefit Shrewsbury, but
we trained
quite a
the
few
Westboro public school teachers were all trained. I think all the high school teachers, and I think some of the middle school were trained. In Worcester, we did training, police, fire, anyone who comes in contact with youth have been able to take, and I think it's over 600 people that have been trained.
All the neighboring communities, Grafton, Tohoto, and Boylston.
And there's a long list now too, a waiting list I know of communities. So hopefully that's something, and it was something that recently played out in the news, you know, that this is something that people who work with youth really see the importance of it. And amazingly, we're at the end of our time, and I never get to talk about all the things that I want to talk about, but I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate all that you do in our community, and
thank you for having me.
We'll have to do this again, and I look forward to seeing all of you again soon on my next Conversations with Hannah.